Welcome to ICF Insights. I'm Tony Marchese. Well, today we are going to celebrate the significant contributions of a retired educator here in West Virginia. In fact, this is the beginning of a series that we're calling our Legacy Series here on ICF Insights. And with me this morning, I have Dr. Phil Suter. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Really looking forward to talking with you today about your journey, both personal and professional. And I know that you've got a lot of fascinating stories, and you've seen a lot of things, and have some strong views on what best practices look like for education today.
Yes.
So we've got a lot to cover, and we're going to do our best this morning.
Okay.
I
welcome that.
All right. I'd like to talk a little bit about your professional journey. I know we talked a little bit the other day. And you spent quite a bit of time in school, both as a student and then as a professional. When did it all start for you?
Well, my service as an educator actually got started when I was in the military in the time of the Korean War. I was not in Korea, but I was asked to teach in a military school. Shortly after that, I began writing curriculum, writing testing, and doing things like that. And I realized this is something that I really would like to do. So when I got out of service, I finished my education, and I've been involved in education in some capacity now for very close to 60 years.
That's something. When you decided that you were going to do your post-secondary education, what did you study?
Preparation as a teacher primarily, and I did my undergraduate work at Marshall. At that time it was Marshall College, now Marshall University. I majored in business generally and taught in that particular area in the high schools. I completed a master's degree at Marshall University, did graduate work at Miami University of Ohio, and completed my doctoral work at Ohio State. In all of those cases, it was in education. My doctoral work was in ed administration, curriculum, instruction, things like that, but I also have a cognate area in sociology.
Oh, okay. We didn't talk about that part.
Yes.
That makes sense now when I think about
Yes.
some of the things that you've shared with me. When you look at your professional career, you said you started, working in the military
Yes.
in education, and then I know that you worked as a teacher, and then also as an administrator down the road. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes, I started out in Ohio. I'm a native of Ohio, really, and I taught for several years in the schools of Ohio, in southern Ohio. But I was also a high school principal in southern Ohio before going then to Marshall University to teach.
Okay. And then you later worked for the West Virginia Department of Education.
I did. I left Marshall and came to the West Virginia Department of Education first as the Director of Teacher Preparation and then as Assistant State Superintendent of Schools. And I directed the Bureau of Learning Systems. And that's very broadly based in terms of the kinds of things we dealt with. There was well over 100 people in that bureau, and we just generally dealt with all aspects of public education.
And I think about your career, you've seen things from a variety of perspectives, both as a teacher in the classroom, as a principal, but then also working in administration for the State Department of Education.
Yes.
So I know that you've got a lot of thoughts, and you understand the context for education and where things happen, and how they end up getting translated down to the classroom level.
Sure. I'd like to think that I've learned a few things along in that period of time. Context is very, very important. School culture and things like that are very, very important, and they have to be a part of our thinking about education today, Tony.
And I know that you've watched this program before, and
Yes.
normally we take on a very strong topical program. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the program, this is part of what we're calling our Legacy Series, where we're going to trace the career of educators in this area, in the Appalachia Region, and kind of look at what they've seen, what they've experienced, what were some of those turning points for them as a professional, what factors contributed to their ultimate contributions that were made to education in Appalachia. So those are some things that we're going to talk about today.
Okay.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the turning points for you as an educator?
Well, it so happened that I was assistant state superintendent of schools at the time of what is now known as the textbook controversy. I believe that was 1974. I was very much a part of that. It caused me to think a lot about a parent's role in education of their own children, how we ought to include parents, or for a particular school there ought to be a parent organization. I think parents still should have a lot to say about the education of their own children. So I face those kinds of issues.
Let's assume that we have some viewers that were not either here at the time of the textbook controversy, or maybe it's been so long that they've kind of put it out of their mind. Tell me kind of in a nutshell what it was, what happened.
Well, basically the issue was the content of the textbooks. You know that the state of West Virginia has a textbook committee, and adoption of textbooks and approved list is made at the state level. So, and that was a part of my responsibility when I was assistant state superintendent of schools. But a number of parents were concerned about the content of some textbooks, and that's what it really started over. And it was centered primarily, I think, in the eastern part of Kanawha County. But eventually, the issues reached into all of the county, and that was the major concern.
How did the controversy actually manifest itself? What were some things that were actually happening?
Well, you know, I actually sat in my office and saw marches around the Capitol building, for example. And I'm talking about thousands of people. So there were meetings, this and that. Even the United Mine Workers got involved at some time in that controversy. So it was something very, very significant. There's much written about it. Right?
Really?
By the way, there are books written about it. You can find all kinds of information about the controversy on the internet.
How did it resolve itself?
No, that's hard to say. I'm not sure that's totally resolved itself. There were some commitments made, I think, on both sides. There was an attempt, you know, to make some modifications as far as the State Department was concerned, and how that selection process was to be done, and the role of parents involved in that. I'm not sure that all of that came to fruition, but I think basically there was a cooling off period, and we got about the business then of educating children again.
Yeah, it sounds like it really helped facilitate some important conversations.
There were many good conversations. Yes.
What about other turning points in your career?
I was teaching at Marshall University at the time of the plane crash. That would have been November 14, I believe, 1970. That certainly impacted my view of things, because I saw the impact of that crashing of that plane on that campus. It happened on a Saturday night. I was there early on Sunday morning, and I was amazed really at the impact of that. It was kind of like a shroud that overspread everything. And that lasted for a good period of time. I don't know how old I was, but it certainly caused me at that time to think about what life is all about, how quickly life can end, the impact of that, and how it impacted so many young people on the campus of Marshall University.
How did you find out?
You know, I found out about the crash when my sister had a nephew who was working at the airport, and her nephew called and told her, and of course immediately then she called me about the plane crash.
And you were actually involved in some of the response that the university had?
Yes, I accompanied a body of a young ball player to Dallas, Texas for the funeral, representing the university there, visiting with that family. And that certainly was an eye-opening experience for me to be there with that family. And I think I was in Dallas, Texas for about 3 days. By the way, I think the university did everything they possibly could do to respond to those families. They were brought back years later, and I was able to meet that family maybe 5 years later, whatever that period of time was, just to see how they were doing and this and that. So things like that really change your life. They cause you to think about issues of life.
Oh, I'm sure.
What's important.
I have to ask, there was a movie that was released, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, maybe
Something
not
like
that
that.
long ago. We Are Marshall.
Yes.
What'd you think? Was that an accurate representation?
I was pleased with what I saw, and I've seen the movie once, and I think it is a fairly accurate representation of what went on the campus. Yes.
Well, I'm sure that it definitely impacted you and everyone around.
Yeah. By the way, Tony, I knew a number of those students.
Did you really?
Yes. They were on the football team, and I had regular contact with some of them.
I can't imagine what that was
Yeah.
like.